What is up, you guys, and welcome back to my channel. So today we are going to be going over the unsolved disappearances and presumed murders of 17-year-old Molly Miller and 21-year-old Colt Haynes from Wilson/Love County, Oklahoma, back in July of 2013. I feel like to understand this case, you have to have everything possible. And you'll understand why by the end of this video. So I'm hoping I do a good job at getting everything I possibly can into this video so that, it's easily digestible and gives you guys a really good picture so that hopefully someone with a different perspective can maybe offer some sort of help to these families and to this case. This case involves a ton of corruption. There's a ridiculous amount of lack of communication, in my opinion. There's multiple counties involved, everything up to a federal level involved, multiple families, drugs, a car chase. Like, all I could think of while researching this cannot possibly be real. Like, this has to be a plot of a movie. It is insanity, and it's so disturbing, a lot of the things that happened in this case. But before I get into this case, I want to first thank Audible for partnering with me on today's video. You guys know how much I love working with Audible and their support for true crime channels just in general. And for those of you who don't know, Audible is a leading provider for spoken word entertainment, everything from podcasts to guided meditation, audiobooks, Audible originals, sleep tracks, and more. Audible is great to listen to anytime, anywhere, when you're in the car on a long trip, or if you're working out, trying to get stuff done around the yard or the house, and it's a really good way to get your true crime fix. Now, right now, I'm currently listening to The I-5 Killer by Ann Rule, and those familiar with Ann Rule will know that this is an amazing audiobook. The audiobook is about a man named Randall Woodfield, who is also known as the I-5 Killer or the I-5 Bandit. He's known for a killing spree that stretched along Interstate 5 through Washington, Oregon, to California back in the 80s, leading to what's thought to be 44, possibly more victims. Now, this serial killer is one that has always bothered me because he has such like an average upbringing, which I feel like you don't typically see. Usually there's some sort of signs in their, early childhood life. But from the outside, he was amazing in school, got really good grades. He was really smart, really good at sports, had a good family life from what it seemed like on the outside. And then somewhere along the way, there was just a really hard, sharp turn off of the tracks. This audiobook goes through it all from start to finish, all the victims, everything that happened in his path, and the way that authorities banded together to catch the serial killer. It's definitely an audiobook that I highly recommend for you guys. There are so many different selections in the mystery/thriller section on Audible, so if true crime isn't necessarily your thing and you prefer maybe like supernatural or crime fiction or even just completely other genres such as romance, history, technology, there's always something for everybody on Audible. Audible members get 1 credit every single month that's good for any title in their premium selection that you get to keep forever, and all members have access to the Plus catalog, which is actually something new and pretty amazing that Audible has done to give their members more. Plus catalog consists of thousands and thousands of podcasts, Audible originals, audiobooks, and more that are all just included in your membership. You can enjoy as many of them as you want, and there's just an endless selection. If you want to check out Ann Rule, the I-5 Killer, or any of these other topics that I mentioned that interest you, you can go to audible.com/Danielle or text Danielle to 500 to get 1 free audiobook and start a 30-day free trial, and you get to explore the Plus catalog and everything else Audible has to offer. Thank you again to Audible for working with me on today's video, and now into the details of this case. So first, I just want to get into who exactly Molly was, who exactly Colt was. I feel like in my research, I found much more information about Molly than I did Colt. So Molly, according to those that knew her, she was incredibly outspoken. She was a very loving kid. She grew up in Wilson her entire life. She was just the kind of person that stood up for anyone and everyone without question. And she was really close to her family. She was really good at softball. She had these dreams of becoming a nurse when she graduated from high school. And she had, I believe, just finished up her junior year of high school before her disappearance. Now, before her disappearance, Molly started to display some very worrisome behavior to her family. She, from my understanding, began to skip school. She started to butt heads more frequently with her mother, which, I mean, I feel like are a lot of pretty typical teenage angst things to do. But she also started hanging out with a really, really questionable crowd. And according to her family, she started to mess around in drugs a little bit. And unfortunately, that's something that seems to be very common for the entire area over this way in Oklahoma. First of all, Wilson was less than 2,000 population. There were not a whole lot of people there. It wasn't tiny by any means, but it just wasn't large. It's mainly like rural farmland surrounding it. There's not a lot to do there, so a lot of the teenagers end up turning to things like drugs and drinking. This is something that Molly just started to get stuck in. Friends and family really tried to push her to make better decisions, but I feel like that maybe pushed her to just be more secretive about some of the things that she did, which is kind of what led to her disappearance. So a week prior to disappearing, she met 21-year-old Colt Haynes, and this is something that she kept from most people in her life. Her best friend in interviews has stated that she didn't even know Colt. She had no clue that Molly knew Colt or that they had apparently started dating. Now, the reason she may have kept this from a lot of people is because of some history on Colt. So first of all, he was much older than her. He was 21 and she was 17, and he also had a son already with another woman and a history of drug use. In 2011, so just a few years prior, he was charged with endeavoring to manufacture meth. He did confess to using meth and marijuana, so we know that he was very involved in drugs. His sister has also come forward and stated that unfortunately, in his early teen years, that's when he started using them, and he would use them sporadically. Sometimes, usually they knew he was using again because he would kind of disappear from home for a while. And right before all of this disappearance occurred, he was actually supposed to be attending a program because of his 2011 charges. And unfortunately, his probation officer had claimed that he was making absolutely no progress. He was refusing to cut off some of the people in his life that were other known criminals and drug users. So his probation officer was essentially asking for him to go back to court. There was even a warrant issued for his arrest on July 18th. They had already both gone missing before this. Now, while Colt wasn't necessarily known to be a bad guy, lots of people spoke highly of him, said that he was very kind, and he was just, a good person. He just involved himself in very questionable activities and with very questionable people. And this leads us to the night of their disappearance. So it was July 7th, 2013. Again, Molly and Colt had only known each other for a week at this point, and she was hanging out at the home that he had been living at the time. I have absolutely no idea where the location of this home is. If anyone else was living there, I have seen that there was potentially a small house party that was being held at this house that night. And at some point during that night, a man known as James Con Nip, he goes by Con for most of the community, that's how they know him, he showed up at the home in a 2012 Honda Accord to pick both Molly and Colt up. Now, this was kind of an odd group to be together. While Molly and Colt had just met each other, they separately had known Con for a very long time. Molly had known him her entire time growing up, pretty much just because they lived really close. They were similar in age. I believe Con was around the same age as Colt. They weren't close friends by any means, but they definitely knew of each other. It seems like a lot of families in this area knew each other well enough to go to family reunions together, and they just did a lot together. And then Colt knew Con for a while, but their relationship was a little bit tumultuous, I guess you could say. So Colt had a son, as I explained to you before, and apparently after this happened, Con went on to date the mother of his son. So you can see how there's probably a little bit of tension there, why they probably didn't get along very well. So it was kind of strange that Colt, who didn't like Con, and Con, who didn't like Colt, were hanging out with Molly, who knew both of them. It was just kind of like a weird mixture that you wouldn't typically see. Witnesses saw the couple leaving with Con driving the car, Colt was in the front passenger seat, and Molly was in the back seat of the car. So at around 10:30 p.m. that night, the car was seen at a convenience store in Wilson, but what came next was likely very unexpected to both Colt and Molly. All three individuals were in the parking lot in the car when Khan decided to just spin tires, flip a donut, and kick rocks at two Wilson City police officers. He then sped off, tempting the police to chase him. And that is exactly what happened. Khan went through downtown Wilson before he turned onto Highway 76, and from what I've seen, once he hit Highway 76, he knocked his lights off and reached speeds of up to 120 miles per hour, basically barreling towards Love County, which is on the other side of Carter County. Now, Carter County officials called into Love County to let them know they were on a high-speed car chase, they needed backup, and this Honda, was headed their way. And at the time, I don't think they have any clue who was in the car because this car actually belonged to the girl that Khan was currently dating, but wasn't even coming back as belonging to him if they ran the plates. Khan did eventually pass over the county line, and he turned onto Oswald Road that would have been a left. And at this point, the Love County Sheriff ended up calling in to tell all of the deputies to halt the chase and stand down because he claimed he didn't want any more of his cars to be torn up. Car chases, as I'm sure you all know, are very dangerous to everybody involved. When you are traveling at 120 miles per hour on public roads through terrain like they have in this area, I'm talking dirt roads that are pretty much one way. There's absolutely no lighting out where this was happening. It's incredibly dangerous. It's not that uncommon to call it off. And I guess that's just what the local police believed was happening, that it was just getting too dangerous and they didn't need to chase anymore. Now, there isn't much really known about the chase and how exactly it ended and who said what and, all the things about it, which will make sense in a minute. But it's also why the disappearance of both Molly and Colt directly after this is pretty much all questions and no answers. So there's a lot of information online that could either just be misinformation or rumors, or it's just changing information about where exactly the car chase stopped, why the car chase stopped, what happened afterward. Some resources say that the chase continued down Oswald Road and then took an immediate right down a dead-end road called Long Hollow Road. Other sources say that it stopped before they even reached Long Hollow Road. Some sources say that it stopped because this, sheriff called and said to stop. Other sources say that the Honda ended up going through the woods, like totally went off-road and went through the woods, and that's why they stopped. But despite numerous sources of this conflicting information, there are a few things that seem to be known for sure. And that's that, first of all, this police chase was never properly reported after it happened by anyone for a reason, and it was stopped by the Love County Sheriff for a reason. The Love County Sheriff's name is Joe Russell. And Joe Russell is the cousin of Con Nip, who was driving the car in the police chase down Long Hollow Road, which is the Nip family property. So at this point, police had entirely abandoned a chase because the family member, who was also the sheriff of the town, was protecting his cousin, who is the driver. There was no report on it, probably for that same reason. And so now the details around that particular chase are slim to none. However, after this chase, something went very, very wrong. Con Nip made it back home safely, but Molly and Colt didn't. And Con, the last person to be seen with Molly and Colt in this car chase, said that he had no clue what happened to them. He stuck to the idea to this day that he wasn't even with them that night. So as I said, lack of communication has kind of destroyed this case, and in my personal opinion, it's because Joe Russell made sure to cut every single line of communication as he came across it. This isn't a scenario where nobody knew that Colt and Molly were missing for days. It's the exact opposite. People were pretty much immediately searching for them. So as I said, the chase started at around 10:30 p.m. that night. It is roughly, according to Google Maps, about a 20-minute drive from Wilson to this location. Obviously, speed changes that. They were going 120 miles an hour. I don't know the exact convenience store that they were at, but it's safe to say that within 20 minutes, so by 10:50, they were absolutely, gone from the cops. The cops had already backed out. But starting at either 12:47 or 12:57, I've seen both given, calls started coming into 911. from Molly's phone. But we have about a 2-hour gap from when the chase ended to when the 911 call started to come in. So the first 911 call made, like I said, came from Molly's phone, and the dispatcher couldn't hear anything on the other end of the line. Molly wasn't talking, it was just silence, and then maybe some sounds of maybe someone pushing buttons. And after 5 seconds, the call ended. Whether it dropped or was hung up, I'm not sure, but it ended. So the dispatcher, as they're supposed to do, called back and received no answer. And the proper Oklahoma protocol is that at that point, they're obligated to send an officer out to the scene to make sure it's not like domestic violence or someone being held captive or something. But for some reason, deputies were not sent out to the scene. That initial call sent off a ping being in the area between Long Hollow Road and Pike Road. I will have a map up. You can see you would have reached Pike Road first from 67 going along Oswalt Road, and then you would have hit Long Hollow. So somewhere in the middle of that, just outside of NIP property lines, that is where Molly was calling 911 from. The first call was not the last one. Like rapid fire, Molly made over a dozen phone calls, 1 minute apart from her phone, again and again and again and again. And unfortunately, every single one seemed to drop. So she never actually made it through to 911. And then after that, calls began to pour in to friends from both Molly and Colt. Collectively, they called over 30 individuals over the course of the next few hours and pretty much told the exact same story to the few that ended up actually answering the phone. Both Molly and Colt spoke to individuals telling them that they had been dropped off in the middle of the woods after a car chase by Con Nip, and they had absolutely no idea where they were. They knew they were in the middle of the woods somewhere off of Oswalt Road between Pike and Long Hollow Road, but they needed water and they needed a ride. It was pitch blackout. Like there's already no lights on the streets from what I saw when I walked them from Google Maps, and then you literally have them in the middle of just like acres and acres and acres and acres of woods and fields. I can see why they couldn't figure out where they were and what was going on. While multiple individuals either didn't answer their phone or couldn't come and get them, there were actually a few that did try to search for them. There were 33 separate incoming and outgoing calls to one person in specific from Molly's phone, and this was actually one of Colt's friends, so he was, I guess, using her phone. I'm not exactly sure why. But he was using her phone and trying to get this guy to come and look for them. Now, this guy did in fact come out, but he unfortunately went to the wrong road, like 10 miles away. So I'm sure the 33 phone calls back and forth were them just trying to like figure out where he was, where they were in relation to that. But unfortunately, I'm assuming he just kind of gave up on the search. I don't have a full kind of idea of the call log and how many different calls were made and the time between them, but I do know that at 6:30 a.m., Molly did speak to another close friend. This person was able to confirm it was her on the phone, so we have them there for hours in the same location. And she asked this friend for a ride, and he unfortunately could not come to get her. She called another friend at 9:33, so this is like quite a few hours of a difference, still in the same location, still asking to be picked up, but unfortunately this friend also couldn't come. Now, during all of this, Colt was making his own phone calls from his phone as well, and he told pretty much everyone that he spoke to that he was badly injured. According to what Colt said, he had climbed up in a tree and fallen out of it, and he broke his ankle to the point where his bone was sticking out. He told some people he was coughing up blood. He was laying in the bottom of a creek bed, unable to move, so he was badly injured. And a lot of people kind of speculate that he was either up there trying to figure out where they were, maybe he was trying to get more cell service, and then he just ended up slipping and falling, and that's also why they didn't move anywhere all of those hours, because he couldn't. He literally had his bone sticking out of his leg, and Molly wasn't just going to abandon him there, so that's why they just never went anywhere. 4 other individuals that Colt got in contact with did also try to come out and search for them. And from my understanding, they actually also knew Con Nip pretty well. I'm unsure exactly what time they came out to search for both Colt and Molly, but they were there for hours, and I know that they were there into like the early morning by the time the sun had come up. They did drive down Pike Road. They were laying on their horn to see, you know, on the phone with Colt saying like, can you hear us? Like, can you hear us laying on the horn just up and down Pike Road? And they couldn't hear anything. Now, it would have been completely quiet out there, so I find it super strange that they didn't hear anything. We know they were there because that's where their phones were pinging. We know these guys were on Pike Road, but that kind of tells me they were quite literally in the dead center of this area, which makes sense because he said he fell in like a ravine or a creek bed, and on Google Maps there's like a very obvious one that goes right down the middle and between those two roads. So I'm thinking they were in the right place, but they were just so deep into that land that they couldn't hear anything. People that Colt spoke to on the phone were also able to confirm for the most part that Molly and Colt did remain together at least for a while. A few of them heard Molly speaking in the background, and a few of them actually remembered that Colt was getting really irritated with Molly. My assumption is that he felt very helpless. He was hurt. He couldn't get up. He was probably terrified. And so he was just acting out towards Molly because she wasn't able to get them out of this situation. So we know they at least were together, but we also know that Con got home, but we'll get to that in a little bit. The four guys could not locate Molly and Colt. They decided to head down Long Hollow Road, and they ended up finding Con. And they decided to ask him where on earth Con dropped them off because they couldn't find them. They were desperately in need of help. Colt was obviously hurt. And Con was basically acting like nothing happened the night before, like super casual. And when they said, hey, where did you drop Molly and Colt off? Colt's hurt. Con didn't know that Colt was on the phone, and he said, oh, don't listen to them. Like, don't listen to them. They're just messing around with you. They're safe. Like, don't go look for them. And at this point, Colt was pissed, and he decided he wanted to speak to Con, so they put Con on the phone, and I guess there was a very brief conversation. According to these guys, they couldn't hear anything because Con kind of like walked off and was whispering into the phone. And then the call ended, and Con proceeded to ask this group if they remembered where he left this stolen Mustang that I guess they all knew about or were somehow involved in. And so this kind of shows me how these individuals knew Con. I guess they all kind of were wrapped up in drugs and stealing cars and doing crazy things. Basically, there's a Mustang that he, I guess, stole, and he kind of dropped off in the middle of the woods beside his aunt's property. And this is still on family land, and he said that that is where he dropped Molly and Colt off. I guess these guys asked to walk through his family's property in order to get there. Con said no. I don't know what happened from there. I don't know if Con went with them. I've heard they possibly hopped on like ATVs or horseback and headed out there because it was just a lot of land. I don't even know what location they went in terms of this property because there's just not a lot known about it. But some way, somehow, I guess they went to that location. However, after this, the information stops. The only thing we know from this point on is that Molly called the last individual at 9:33 a.m. asking for a ride, but by 9:39 a.m. her phone was off. And within 15 minutes of Molly's phone turning off, Colt's phone turned off as well. So either both of their phones died at the same time, which I don't think is impossible if they both had been using them all night long, possibly had their flashlight on to see where they were all night long. It's just kind of strange how like close both of them managed to just suddenly turn off. And then from that point on, nobody heard from Molly or Colt ever again. I wish I had more information on the timeline on when these four individuals came and, were speaking to Colt and Molly and trying to find them and then went to speak to Con. I would love to know if they ever made it to this area where there was this Mustang, and did they search this area for Molly and Colt? Did Con come with them when this happened? Did they just leave after they didn't find anything, or after maybe Colt and Molly stopped answering the phone? I just don't understand how they went from spending hours and hours driving up and down, honking the horn, searching through the woods, going to speak to Con, and then all of a sudden, nothing. Like, all information stops. And that could easily be explained, and I just didn't find the explanation, but from the standpoint and information I have, that seems weird. At this point, word was kind of spreading that Colt and Molly had gotten lost after this car chase, and I guess there were some Facebook posts about it, and their families found out, and everyone knew Con and knew that he was trouble. This was not a first-time thing for Con, these car chases. It's literally what he was known for taking cars that usually weren't his, pissing off police officers, kicking rocks up at them by, spinning his wheels. And then he would always run back to Love County, where he was under this umbrella of his cousin. And then he would disappear into the woods and just abandon the cars there. So what he did with Molly and Colt was no different than normal, but how on earth did they all manage to be separated and Molly and Colt just not turn up anywhere? Given the state that Colt seemed to be in, a lot of people were in a panic because he was obviously hurt. He was potentially bleeding. He could not get himself out of the situation. So Colt and Molly ended up being reported as missing persons, and people kind of immediately hit the ground running, at least families, in order to search for them. I know that both of them were reported as missing and filed as a missing person in Wilson, which is in Carter County. Everyone knew that there was this car chase. The rumor had spread already. The word had spread already. Everyone knew that this ended in Love County. So logically, Molly's family called Love County and wanted to file Molly as a missing person. And I'm sure Colt's family did the exact same. But the reaction that Molly's family got is startling. When Molly's mom, Melissa, called, the dispatcher took the phone to Joe Russell, who I guess was just about to go out for patrol or maybe was just getting ready to get in the car and go home. And this is literally like the following day. And this dispatcher is like, Molly Miller's mom's on the phone. She's missing. She apparently went missing here after a car chase, and, you need to help her. And he said, "This isn't my problem. I won't file a missing persons report." And left it at that. And it shocked Molly's mom and it shocked the dispatcher to the point that the dispatcher took all of the information she could. She created her own flyers, put her own flyers up around Love County Sheriff Department and the town. And within 2 months, she was fired. And a lot of people believe she was fired because she helped when Joe Russell tried to shut everything down. So the location that Colt and Molly were last seen at was in Love County, which is run by Sheriff Joe Russell, who wouldn't file a report that they were missing after knowing that they disappeared after being with his cousin Connip in a car chase that he called off that ended on his family's property. Wilson Police Chief Felix Hernandez was kind of the one who was working on the case originally. I know they both were originally treated as a runaway. Well, at least I know Molly's was, but I think it got to a point once all this information about this car chase came out that they decided to switch it. And unfortunately, Molly did not meet the requirements for an Amber Alert despite being under the age of 18 because she was not technically taken. She willingly got into this vehicle. They didn't have like a vehicle description because the vehicle was, driven into the woods. And Chief Hernandez also, his jurisdiction wasn't even where both of them went missing. So his hands were kind of tied. He stated in a few media articles that they did do some searches. He says there were ground searches and air searches. They did search a few ponds. I also heard that they did finally kind of put 2 and 2 together, and they interviewed Con. But according to the family, very minimal work was done. And also, according to them, no actual grid searches in proper places or anything were done until 2019. According to what Felix said, his initial investigation on the cases showed that there were a lot of rumors being spread. And I won't even get into a lot of them because the family and a lot of people believe some of them were just intentionally said or just said to say it. There were a lot of things, though, that led authorities to check in Texas numerous times and certain locations that it was claimed their bodies were. Everything they searched ended, nowhere. And without participation from the Love County Sheriff's Department, the case was just stagnant. Then 2 weeks after the chase and disappearances, the Honda used in it was found. It was found in a field off of Oswalt Road, so pretty much exactly where the chase ended, like right when I guess authorities saw it going through the woods or something of the sort, right there it was found. And apparently the car was about 100 yards away from where Molly and Colt's phones were pinging. The car itself had over $18,000 in damage. It had gone through multiple barbed wire fences, which were apparently very common complaints from the neighbors that Con just made it a regular thing during these car chases in general to just drive through people's fences and tear them down and their gates. And there were pieces of the car just like scattered absolutely everywhere. I've seen that it was either found by the Oklahoma Highway Patrol, or it was found by Love County deputies. I can't remember which one found it, but I know it ended up in the hands of Love County deputies. I don't know if it was ever fully handed over to Felix Hernandez, but I know that he did have the opportunity to, I guess, either do forensic testing or was relying on Love County's forensic testing, which makes me a little bit nervous. But Felix Hernandez has stated that there was no sign of foul play in the car. There wasn't blood or anything in the car. It obviously had been used in a very aggressive car chase, but there wasn't any sign that anything had happened within it. Now, since the car was so close to where Molly and Colt had been stranded in the woods, paired with what they told friends, it's believed that either they kind of abandoned the vehicle real quick and then walked off, basically trying to hide from authorities, and Con went but didn't make it very far, and the car kind of stopped, and then he ran off in his own direction, or maybe they all left the vehicle at the same time, and Con just like didn't tell them the way and took off without them to save himself. And when you're thinking about the panic and stress that's probably happening in that event on both sides, we know Con's getting some sort of sick adrenaline rush from it, and Molly and Colt are probably absolutely horrified. If any of them are on drugs, which could be a possibility in this situation, you're just amplifying that. There's no way to really tell what exactly happened here. But what is widely believed is that Molly and Colt basically separated off on their own. They may have just been sick and tired of what Colt just did and were scared to death, so they ran off on their own, realized they were stuck in the middle of the woods while trying to hide from police. They just like pushed deeper in, ended up only about 100 yards away from the car when Colt decided to climb up in the tree, fell, and maybe just totally, stopped any chances that they were going to get out because he was kind of down and out. But what really kind of gets to me is the fact that there were no calls made that I know of for that 2-hour span. I don't know if they had called any friends in that time point, and that would kind of make things make a bit more sense. And then they finally maybe decided to call 911 when they realized they were stuck and they weren't finding a way out and none of their friends could come and get them. I don't know exactly. I just find that 2-hour time period weird. Again, if I had more information, it may make sense, but right now it doesn't. But what really is screwed, in my opinion, is the fact that Con knew that these two were out there in the middle of the woods that he had grown up with, so he knows that it's difficult to find your way in and out of them, and he left them there. And he didn't, call anyone for help. I don't know if there's any evidence he even called either of them to make sure that they were okay. I don't know if they ever called him or they were just so done with him that they didn't. But he also knew that he was their only way back to Wilson unless someone came to get them. Like, he had driven them 20 minutes away in this crazy car chase and then left them and never thought to reach back out to them. I've seen that Con wasn't ever fully interviewed by anyone. I know that Felix Hernandez has made claims that he did interview Con, but the family is saying that for months afterwards, like, nobody spoke to him, not a single person. But apparently what he did say to people, and according to Felix Hernandez, when he did question Con finally, Con claimed he was never with Molly and Colt that night. And after kind of speaking to those 4 individuals and telling them where he dropped them off, after that, he did not ever utter a single word to anyone that he was with them. It was all straight denial from there. Now, according to phone records that were pulled, this was a lie. Authorities were able to confirm that Con, Molly, and Colt were all in the car together, that he picked them up, that they traveled together all the way during the car chase. So he was lying, but it was, about figuring out why exactly he was lying. The families were on their own at this point. Authorities, according to family, didn't do any grid searches. Like I had mentioned, there were no organized searches in the area unless the family did them. I know EquiSearch, literally blessed Tim Miller, came out and helped them search whenever they could. I know that authorities did come out to protect the family, I guess because the Nip family was very adamant that nobody step onto their property. So I know that the authorities were there monitoring the situation and to intake evidence, but they never actively participated in a search. Around 2 months after the disappearance, on the 1st of September, EquiSearch, this was one of the times that they were out there helping the family. They were combing through all of the areas that they had access to, asking certain family, members with land around the Nip family land if they could search their property. And at the end of the day, they decided to just kind of walk up and down Long Hollow Road. And they ended up running into Con's aunt. And they asked the aunt if they could search the property to see if there was anything weird there. She said it was up to the grandfather. So they went and spoke to the grandfather, and he declined and said that they weren't allowed on their property unless they had a warrant. But at this time, Paula, who is Molly's cousin, she was present at these searches and was one of the ones asking for access onto the property. And while they were there speaking to the grandfather, lo and behold, who shows up? Con Nip and his father. Now, they asked to speak to Con, and he did, in fact, agree to speak with them, and they spoke for about 30 minutes. Paula told Con that she just wanted to know if Molly was safe when he dropped her off. You know, they just needed answers. They needed to know what could have possibly happened. Where did you drop them off? Where could they possibly have gone? Why have they vanished from the area that their phones were pinging? Why did their phones turn off in that same area? They're not there. And Con just repeatedly stated that he had no idea what they were talking about, that he was never with Molly and Colt that night. And so Paula confronted him about his phone pinging in the same location, that they had paperwork proving otherwise. And when they confronted him with this, he said that he didn't want to go to jail. Now, at this point, they were like, okay, we've got to push him for information. So Paula started saying, you know, we know that Molly's dead. Unfortunately, that's something that we've kind of grasped, is that Molly is no longer alive. But we still love her, and we still want to bring her home no matter what. Where is she? We just want to know where she is. And upon saying this, Con got very emotional. He started to tear up. He was very clearly in distress. He walked to the opposite side of the porch and sat down on this box and just started rocking back and forth. And Paula continued talking to his aunt, who was like, wait, you really think she's dead? And another family member went over to speak to Con and basically said, we will pay you whatever amount. It doesn't matter. We just want the answers. And Con said, this isn't about the money. So it became obvious Con at least knew a lot more than he was letting on, and that Molly and Colt weren't just left in the woods and something happened. There was more to the story. There had to be, or Con wouldn't have been saying these things. Police started to dig in further, and it was reported to police by Con's sister that on July 16th and July 17th of 2013, just weeks after the disappearance, Con told her that he was going to go to jail for murder, and he was very upset. And the first time, she didn't believe him, but the second time, she felt like he was telling the truth. However, she also drew a heart before the word murder on her police report, which is just freaking weird. So like I don't, everything about this family just seems so off. Why would you draw a heart before the word murder on a police report? The family knew at this point that they needed some sort of help, so they made sure to keep on pushing. They were very loud about Colt and Molly's disappearance and very loud about what they believed to be corruption in Love County and Joe Russell and their whole family being in on something. And by 2014, the OSBI, which is the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigations, took on the case. And also the family hired a PI named Philip Klein. And I don't know the exact time they hired him, but it was pretty early on in the case from my understanding. Now, they both began to look into the case. They first started off with all of the phone records. I know that the PI interviewed every single individual that Molly and Colt spoke to that night. The PI did build a timeline, kind of dealing with what they believe happened, with the car driving through the fence and then eventually becoming disabled, and essentially Con abandoned the car and then left Colt and Molly wherever they were. And OSBI started to demand information from Love County because Love County should have been investigating this entire time. And all of the information they started to hand over was so bizarre. So every tip handed over by Joe Russell and his department suggested strongly that Molly purposely ran away with someone and was fine and safe, just she ran away. There was even a name, and I cannot remember what exactly it was, that was repeatedly dropped in all of the tips. I mean, it was mentioned numerous times, but it was no one that anyone had heard of before. And while that isn't entirely impossible because we know Molly was dating Colt and no one really knew about it. There could absolutely be someone else that she was talking to that no one knew about. OSBI went through every single tip that the sheriff department from Love County handed them, and none of it turned out, like not a single bit of it. Now, could that just have... So a lot of people started to wonder if all of those tips were fabricated, again, to shake people off of a trail. It really started to seem like Joe Russell only told people exactly what he wanted people to hear, and that he was just this giant hand moving all of the puppets in Love County. And it seems like everyone that ever went with a problem to Love County about this case always immediately went to Joe Russell, and then it never went further than that. He cut it off right away. An informant ended up coming forward as well in 2014, leading to the one and only warrant that I know of that allowed authorities to search the Knipp property. And even then, it was like a very specific small portion. There was apparently this like shed that was on the property, and this informant claimed to be very close to Con and said that they actually helped bury Colt and Molly, and it was by this shed on the property. But the second authorities got to the property with this informant that was supposed to show them where these graves were, the informant said that they had lied. And no one is sure at this point if this was just an informant trying to get, you know, attention, or if, like most people in that entire county, they got to the property, realized the family they were messing with and the risk that they were taking, and thought it was not worth it. Unfortunately, I'm pretty sure the FBI was involved in this, the US Marshals were involved in this search, the OSBI, but they couldn't even go any further because they were fully relying on this informant's information. And now that the informant took it back, the warrant was null and void, so they couldn't even search. But despite not searching, whatever this informant said and whatever information they may have had to support it was enough for them to decide the following day to reclassify the cases as homicide. Now, when it was discovered that the car chase was never reported, and you know, think about it this way. All of these things had happened, but like I said, Joe Russell seemed to be right there ready to like grab these different things that were being reported and shove them down before anyone else knows about them. And I'm sure he lied to God knows how many people about certain things that had happened to keep things on the low, which unfortunately I get into a lot deeper later on in this video. But essentially, a lot of these things that happened, people were kind of finding out, and these different agencies were finding out as they were questioning people and looking deeper into things, and they were having to do kind of like fill in your own blank with it because so many things were left unreported. And once this car chase kind of came to light more and that it was never reported, you know, all of the neighbors were able to confirm that their fences and their gates had been destroyed and no one did anything about it. It was decided that they were going to gather as much information as possible that they could on Con, and they were going to try to approach charges against him, at least in regards to all of these different car chases that he sends everyone on. By January of 2014, Con Knipp was arrested, and oddly enough, he was taken in by Joe Russell, which I feel like is inappropriate, but I mean, what do I know? And he was charged with endangering others while eluding police, assault with a deadly weapon, which was the car, and then the prior one was because of what he did to Colt and Molly, an unauthorized use of a vehicle. So, like I said, he's known for these chases, and apparently the chases didn't stop after Colt and Molly, which I wouldn't assume they would anyways, because he seems to entirely lack any sort of empathy or common sense or good, I guess you could say. And so he had just been on another car chase right before he was arrested. And I think that may have been kind of like the fire that it took for authorities to be able to arrest him. And of course, he would steal these cars. They were usually not his own. The other one was his girlfriend's, the one that was involved in Colt and Molly's case, which, by the way, she reported as missing. So filed a false insurance claim. So like they were just benefiting off of everything that happened essentially. But authorities ended up finding over 5 cars on the property, all linked to cars that were taken and used in these car chases with authorities. And the one that had just happened ended up very bad. So Con was putting up man-made speed bumps along Long Hollow Road. And the city had come out numerous times to take them down. And Joe Russell, I guess, was just passing right over them as if there was nothing weird going on. And Con was doing this for such a sick purpose because none of that road is really lit, and he knows where that speed bump is and his family knows where that speed bump is, but police chasing him don't. And he was using it as a way to basically harm police officers, and that's exactly what happened in January of 2014. A police officer was chasing him, hit the speed bump unknowingly after Con dodged it, and it launched the police officer in the air and into a tree. Con was just a bad person. Like, through and through, he was not good. I don't understand how someone could set someone else up for something like that. All these police chases, I literally do not understand if he just enjoyed it because he felt untouchable, and like it was so much fun to run from authorities and then know he would never get caught or ever really be charged for it because his cousin was protecting him. I don't know if he pushed that maybe when it came to other crimes committed, possibly connected with Molly and Colt. But he frequently did this and went through these back roads and needed to be stopped. And when you look at Google Maps, something that I found super disturbing is that all of that land, you see trails going all through it. You can tell that whether it's just the Nip family or other families nearby, you can get to anywhere on that land for the most part by a trail. And you can get from Pike Road to Oswalt Road and Pike Road to Long Hollow Road, vice versa, all the way around. So him kind of barreling off the road, seemingly into the treacherous woods, there were trails everywhere. I'm sure they were meant for ATVs, but I'm sure cars could make it too. And from that point, he knew exactly how to get himself home because he'd grown up on this property. And finally, he's arrested. He is charged for all of these horrible things in terms of his car chases and the danger that he put Molly and Colt in. Unfortunately, they have nothing to charge him in the disappearance of them. His girlfriend, whose car it was that was used during Molly and Colt and their car chase, she was charged as well for filing a false police report and a false insurance claim. I think she was sentenced to 3 years, and then Con was sentenced as well to 10 years in prison, but it was far from actual punishment, as I'm sure you could probably assume. From what Molly's family has said, Con was allowed to use the phone pretty much anytime that he wanted to. His family was allowed to come and visit him and basically just walk into the prison and walk directly back to his cell. And the most disturbing thing is that they found that Con was let into the evidence room unattended with family. The same evidence room containing evidence from Molly and Colt's case. It's like anything that could have been preserved, anything about their case that could have been saved. I've never in my life, and in a case that I've looked into, seen this level of corruption. Like, it feels like this shouldn't be real and that this shouldn't be happening. Like, this stuff only happens in movies. But no, apparently it happens in Love County, Oklahoma. A few months into his sentence and only 8 months after their disappearance, an unexpected call ended up coming into 911. And it appeared to have been a pocket dial. I kind of question that. I feel like it may have been a way to let authorities know about something without purposely letting authorities know about something if you're picking up what I'm throwing down. But maybe I just have like way too much hope that there's some sort of like humanity in the Nip family. But on the line, you can hear someone very... It's like it's, you know, the phone is like it's in a pocket and you can hear someone talking, it's distorted about, you know, you're effing crazy, you're effing tired, mentioned something about a machete and Molly, mentioned something about the dead girl. This phone call speaks about shooting him in the mouth and, you know, it's right there. You can put your finger through it. There's mention of drugs. It's really hard to understand, but this is what's been deciphered by authorities. And then you hear splashes of water and a gunshot. In a panic, after the 911 dispatcher heard this, who did they call? I'm sure every single one of you just said it unanimously. Yes, you're correct. They called Joe Russell. I mean, think about it this way. When you have something weird happen, and who's the person you think is going to protect you? The sheriff? Of course. So why not call him? But what do you do when that sheriff is corrupt and you're basically handing over single-handedly all the information to someone who will never pass it along? I have listened to the recording. I hope I'm able to find it somewhere on YouTube so that I can download it and get it for you guys. But if not, it is in one of the Up and Vanished, the podcast version of the coverage. There's like Oxygen show coverage, and then there's the podcast. It's in the podcast. But you can hear the dispatcher talking about it, like in a panic. Like she thinks she's found something. She's like, oh my gosh, there's this person. They're talking about Molly and Colt and like their murder basically and all of these things. And he was talking about a lake. She was like, the lake is just north of Long Hollow Road. And Joe Russell's like, oh, okay. So you said that someone's phone pinged. They're talking about Molly and Colt at north of Long Hollow. And she's like, yeah. And he's like, you're talking about Moxley Lake? And she says, yeah. And so he knew exactly where this was happening and exactly what she was talking about, because it was Con's uncle, Colby, another family member, that had accidentally dialed 911. 8 months after they disappeared, 2 months after Con was put in prison, and he knew exactly where this location was because it's literally the road directly across from Long Hollow Road, across from Nip's family property. From what I know, this was not formally reported, other than just there are, recorded phone calls that are kept because that's just how 911 and, that sort of thing works. And nobody ever went to search Moxley Lake or question Colby Barrick. Unfortunately, just everything big that happened in this case that was immediately handed to Joe Russell, none of it was handed to the OSBI first or, or Wilson City Police or the FBI. It was just all handed to Joe Russell, and then it fell through the cracks. But it seemed like finally the OSBI and the FBI were alert that something was not right, and they saw through what was going on. I'm not sure exactly in what order a lot of this played out. This is kind of like a very hectic moment in the case. There's a lot going on. But Joe Russell, and basically they started looking into Joe Russell. The FBI did. Joe Russell and his son, who's 38 years old, named Willie. And Con was already put away. They already knew that. And so now they're going for these other two that could possibly be involved in something. And they found that Willie likely sold meth and that Joe Russell knew about it. So this level of which corruption is just spiraling. It's getting deeper and deeper and deeper. And in 2015, they were both essentially busted. So Willie ended up being set up by an informant for the FBI. This woman asked to buy meth, tried to do a drug deal. And funny enough, Willie was okay with that. He was down for this drug deal, but he did not want to leave Love County to do it. Again, he's got the umbrella of his father, just like Con had the umbrella of his cousin, just like Uncle Colby had the umbrella of, whoever Joe was to him, whatever Joe was to him. And so Willie really pushed to keep it in Love County, but this informant persisted, and eventually Willie agreed to go over into Carter County to meet. And sure enough, he sold an 8-ball to this informant and ended up being arrested. FBI ended up finding out that Joe had been allowing Willie to sell drugs right under his nose. And not just that, Joe had been letting Willie use his department vehicle to sell them so that he had police scanners. He was able to keep an eye on things so that he wouldn't be stopped. And not just that, he was also allowing their home to be the storage of said drugs knowingly. This is just the tip of the iceberg. Witnesses began to come forward left and right, proving that the sheriff's home had been used as a place to party and do meth since 2011, if not earlier than that, and that Willie was involved in the drugs. Obviously, he was selling them, but there were lots of people that said that Con was involved too, which starts to really connect things. And then you think about the fact that both Molly and Colt had started dabbling in drugs, Colt specifically meth. You can see how this turns into one big circle and connection. And it makes their disappearance on the Nip family property and the family's behavior afterwards that much more suspicious and horrifying. It was also found that Willie and Joe had been harboring a fugitive. There was a woman that was staying with them for an extended period of time. She had warrants in 4 different counties, including Love County. Sheriff Joe should have arrested her. Instead, they basically made this promise to her that if she stayed with Willie and continued to have sex with Willie, that they wouldn't have her arrested and that she could save there. But the second she would try to leave, the second she would deny Willie, he would immediately pull out this threat that I'll have my dad arrest you, I'll have my dad arrest you. So they were basically keeping this woman prisoner. Granted, she was no, role model citizen. She had warrants in different counties, but that's not how you treat somebody. In 2015, she basically decided that she had had enough and she fled the house and moved in with another man. And sure enough, within 2 days, Joe Russell had put out a warrant for her arrest, sent deputies out to search for her. After they couldn't find her, he rolled up his sleeves and he did it himself. He went and found this girl, arrested her for all 4 warrants, and then arrested the guy she stayed with for, get this, harboring a fugitive, which isn't that ironic. But that's still not it. Other victims came forward claiming that they had been picked up on drug charges or other charges. These were all women. Some claimed that they would go and party and do drugs at the Red River, and Joe Russell would show up and then just start arresting them. And this happened all the time for years. But Joe never took them into the sheriff's department. He never booked them or anything. And instead, he would take them to his house and would force them to dance and strip for him and his son in return for drugs and not throwing them in jail. This is just an absolute disgusting abuse of power, corruption to the core, absolute manipulation, illegal protection of his family from all kinds of the law on every single level, and likely a cover-up in terms of their involvement in regards to Molly and Colt's disappearance and murder. And this was just a disaster. And a lot of that information never would have come out, and so many more other people could have potentially been hurt had Molly's family not screamed at the top of their lungs that something was wrong. Authorities gathered all of the information that they could on both Willie and his father, Joe, and Joe ended up being charged in July of 2016 for negligent duty and maladministration. I think that was specifically related to Molly and Colt's case. After all, he never properly investigated it when he should have. It was his jurisdiction. He allowed his own family into evidence rooms without saying anything. He was at least, he at least knew about it. He also was charged with maintaining a drug house and harboring a fugitive, and he was suspended with pay. And then in October of 2016, it was determined by grand jury that he needed to be immediately removed from his position, but he decided to resign before that could happen. Here is the freaking kicker. He was only sentenced to probation after pleading no contest and charged $300 in court costs. Yeah, I'm serious. So Khan only served 4 out of 10 years for these horrific police chases, which, I mean, you can say that loosely because he was allowed a lot of privileges while in prison. Joe served pretty much absolutely nothing. I think he was on house arrest for part of that probation period. And from what I've seen, that was even very loose for him. I don't have a lot of information on Willie and what exactly happened to him, but I know that at least Joe and Con are out walking around, completely free men today, and they're still denying involvement with Molly and Colt. Now, interesting enough, the grand jury in regards to Willie and Joe did end up kind of bringing forward some very disturbing things. First of all, there were other people that claimed that they were sexually assaulted and drugged by Joe and Willie, and interestingly, there was one woman that mentioned Molly basically being taken after Colt was killed. She was drugged, she was sexually assaulted and killed in the shed, which is the same location that the informant that was close to Khan said that, their graves were near. So is that just a coincidence? Or did this person actually know and then got scared? We don't know, and that leads us to what the FBI and OSBI even stated. They're worried that there's other potential victims out there, that it's way past just Molly and Colt, and there's so many other possible individuals that knew too much or saw too much, and they had to get rid of them to maintain the power as a sheriff to basically do whatever they wanted as a family. They have looked into other disappearances. I don't know if they're still looking to other disappearances. There were a few specific names, at least one that they mentioned as possibly being connected to the Nip family. And it also has made authorities wonder if something that night, Molly and Colt saw too much as well, and in order to protect the family, something was done to them. And maybe that's why Con was upset, because this was someone that he had known for a long time, his whole life. And whether they were super close or not, if he is forced to do something to Molly, or, his family does something to Molly, there maybe is going to be some sort of remorse there. I still have a hard time, really feeling like he has any remorse based on the way that he just treats people in everyday life and some of the very scary things and criminal things that he does. But maybe there was some soft part there, and that's why he got so upset. Point blank, the general consensus seems to be that even if Con isn't responsible for whatever may have happened to Molly and Colt, that he at least is feeling some sort of guilt because he knows something. Is it just guilt because he feels like he left them behind in the woods and they never came out, so he's responsible, or did he actually physically do something to them? In 2018, there was another breakthrough. So Uncle Colby, that made that call just months after Con went to prison, was arrested and on totally unrelated charges. He was sentenced to like 46 months or something like that. And while he was incarcerated, he came forward and said that he knew that Molly and Colt were in Moxley Lake. So obviously he still knew information. I mean, he would only know that unless he had been sent out there maybe. Maybe he heard these plans that someone was going to drop them out there. I mean, I don't think he would have been able, I feel like he would have been able to tell on the phone if he was the one that tossed them into the lake. What I'm personally thinking in regards to that is I've wondered why the shots, like why did he throw something in the water and then you hear gunshots? It's a huge area. There's multiple different bodies of water on this land. I personally wonder if multiple members of the Nip family took things like evidence, maybe the phones, maybe it was Molly and Colt, maybe it was their clothes, maybe it was clothes that were worn when they were possibly killed. And I'm wondering if they each had a job to dispose of certain evidence, and once their job was complete, they sent a shot up in the air, to let the other people know. That is my personal theory on that. And I think he was panicking and saying that. Like I'm pretty sure I mentioned before, this call was made 2 months after Con, was charged with unrelated things. And what if they feared, hey, he's now in prison. Is he going to slip up and tell somebody? Is his conscience going to get the best of him? Are they finally going to have enough to get a warrant? And a lot of people believe that Molly and Colt had in fact been buried on the Nip family land, and that they and other belongings were moved and put into Moxley Lake or around this area, which means the initial informant may have been right, that he did in fact help Con bury Molly and Colt, but maybe when he got there, he realized things had been moved and panicked, and that's why he said, oh, never mind, because he noticed something was off. However, as of March 2020, Moxley Lake has still not been searched by authorities. Now, things could have happened since then. I have faith, because I have to have faith for the family and justice for Molly and Colt. But I'm hoping that someone eventually got there. On January 13th of 2021, Molly Miller was legally declared dead, which is something that I'm sure was an incredibly difficult thing for her family to do. But this was not at all a sign of them giving up or stopping the search for her. I think they had just known for a very long time that the chances just weren't good that she is alive and well somewhere. While she had had her struggles, she wasn't someone that would have, disappeared into the woods after an unexpected car chase and then decide, hey, I'm just gonna, go somewhere else and never come back. So searches still continued, absolutely, even just days after they declared her as legally dead. I also know that Adventure with Purpose and EquiSearch came out to the Moxley Lake location. The land where Moxley Lake is, there's like a big long driveway. It's apparently over 1,000 acres and was bought by someone after the disappearances, after the 911 phone call, and this individual has been incredibly helpful to the investigation. He said that when he bought everything, that it was completely barren. Like there were no houses, no buildings, no people went there, like there was nothing. So it would have been an easy place to go where there's no one there living, no one's constantly going to that area and walking around. and to dump something, hoping that no one was ever going to move there, no one was ever going to find it. As soon as he kind of figured out that this was involved in an investigation, he's been very cooperative. He has obviously looked himself, but he said it's almost impossible to search every area of that land just because it is so expansive. I know that this Adventures with Purpose on YouTube, which I highly suggest everyone kind of watch to get an idea of what the terrain and everything looks like. I have it linked down below. They came out and tried to help search, and cadaver dogs were brought in. And I know that areas around Moxley Lake were searched. If I'm not mistaken, Moxley Lake gets to as deep as 20 feet, which is pretty deep. But there's another lake that could possibly be involved that's only 4 to 6 feet. This had been searched numerous times before, and Paula actually went and searched it right after the 911 call was made and saw footprints and four-wheeler prints going into one of the bodies of water, which, I mean, was, according to her, exactly where the uncle's phone pinged. So they believe something could have been thrown in that lake. The cadaver dogs did indicate a couple of times, but it wasn't ever consistent. And so what they kind of came to the conclusion of is that there was just methane gas being released by the water in the creeks and in the lakes there. And so that was kind of mimicking the methane gas that a decomposing body would. I also know that the new owner found a shirt, I believe a bloody shirt, and it looked like a young girl's like tank top or undershirt, and it was hanging in a tree in the area. And they kind of tied off the tree, roped it off so they'd remember it, and then handed that over to authorities. But from what I've seen, authorities lost it, or it's just like has vanished after that. So I just feel like the family's working, like this is like the biggest uphill battle. It's like everything is fighting against them. I don't understand why no one has come out and searched those areas. If OSBI is on it and they seem to be helpful from what I'm seeing, I don't know why they haven't come to search. How is the FBI also involved and like they weren't able to search? Why couldn't anyone get really like a warrant on the NIP property? I mean, obviously my assumption is they just didn't have enough to get it, but it's just so strange to me knowing what I know that these certain areas haven't been searched or they weren't able to get a warrant to search them. I know that Up and Vanished has gone back also to speak to people in the town, and there are people that worked with Joe that had horrible things to say about him and the way that he treated the town and was incredibly corrupt. I know that they went to speak to Joe himself, who quite literally said that he did not give a crap about Molly and Colt's family, and he tried to victimize himself, which really upset me and pissed me off because I know exactly what he's done to so many other people, which, was proven to be true in a trial. But anyways, he, tried to victimize himself, saying that he didn't talk to media anymore or anyone because everyone twisted his words and made him look like a bad guy. And all I could think was, you are a bad guy, first of all, and it's solely because of your own actions. Like, nobody is making you look bad. Your actions make you look bad. And it's frustrating to me that he is using that excuse to not speak about Molly and Colt and the case, because had he not covered up so many things, had he not called off this chase to protect his cousin, this could have ended very, very differently. And I think he's just ashamed of himself and he refuses to admit his own participation and or guilt. And to hear him directly say that he does not care about Molly and Colt's family, how can someone that used to be a sheriff lack so much empathy? The OSBI has since stated that every single tip that has come in, they have checked and it has led to a dead end. And they basically have said that they cannot move forward in the case unless some sort of new information comes to light. And a lot of people believe that after Joe Russell was no longer the sheriff, that a lot of people that were scared of him would come forward with information, but it seems like everyone is just still scared of him and still scared of his family. And I don't think it helps that the current sheriff won't even talk about the case either. Is the current sheriff scared? Like, that's, the current sheriff apparently even got into office and was elected because of his promises to look into Molly and Colt's case. And it seems like now he's just scared and won't do anything. And when you are the new sheriff running the town that used to be riddled with corruption, when you're not standing up to those things and being loud about them, those people that may be relying on your backing and would come forward and say something are instead going to continue sitting in fear because you're not instilling much confidence in them. The families just desperately need help, and people locally, including the Nip family, need to have a serious meeting with their morals and their conscience, because there's answers somewhere. A young adult and a teenager doesn't just vanish. You know, they couldn't go anywhere for hours. You're telling me they didn't go anywhere for hours and all of a sudden they just got up of their own volition and walked away? You will not ever convince me of that. There is a reward right now, $35,000. There apparently is like another $10,000 additional that's been added for any leads that, for anyone that leads to the whereabouts of Molly and Colt. There are 2 active Facebook pages from what I know. Lots of information, literally anything you could ever think of. Constant updates on the case, opinions from family and people that have had to deal with this for so many years at this point. I highly suggest you guys go give these a follow, support this family in whatever way you possibly can, which I know you guys will do. You guys have uplifted so many families and shown so much support to so many people. So it makes my heart happy knowing that at least there will just be that much more of an army behind Molly and Colt's family. As for Molly and Colt, I'm at a total loss. The only reason myself and most people that I've heard cover this case think that they were all together was unfortunately for drugs. Did that cause some sort of issue? Was there some sort of issue with the drugs? Was there some sort of issue with what they saw? Was there some sort of issue with payment? Did it even actually get that far? Or did it just go into this car chase because Khan got, you know, the idea to do it real quick, and then it ended up just kind of causing an argument over that? Was there some sort of argument over Molly? Was there some sort of argument between Khan and Colt over, you know, the woman that they shared? Did Khan come back and try to find them knowing they probably didn't make it very far from the car? And Colt got infuriated because they had been completely abandoned, and that led, you know, to something awful. They clearly made it through the night entirely fine, and then all of a sudden, like, absolutely nothing. And I feel like if their phones had simply died at that point, Molly would have taken off. Molly would have gone off to find help and left Colt because there would have been no other option. And she would have eventually come out somewhere around there. And I don't think that's what happened. But there's absolutely no sign of that. Colt at that point would have been found somewhere in that area, and he wasn't, unless he somehow crossed over into the Nip family lines that no one's been able to search. I don't know. But for the most part, I think they remained together. And since they weren't found in the area of the pings, that means that somebody came to them. And who is the one person that we know for a fact would have known exactly where in the woods they jumped out of the car or they split ways? That would have been Khan. I am crossing my fingers so hard that someone is able to come forward with information to put an end to this madness, because the level of exhaustion I feel as just a third party looking into what happened to these individuals and what these families are going through is absolutely nothing to what they have felt for the past so many years. And I so badly want that to stop for them. Thank you to those of you who have stuck through this wild ride of a case. I'm hoping we have been loud enough in this video and that you guys will share this so many times and tell people about this case, because more people need to see this and see the madness that happened and, you know, the progress that needs to happen. Obviously, some members of the Nip family were willing to say things, and I feel like some of them may know more, and it's time for them to freaking get it off their chest and say it, because the torture they're putting this family through and everyone who's watched, you know, this unfold is horrible. If you have any information at all about Colt and Khan's disappearance, I have all the numbers and everything you could possibly need down below to report that information. Again, like I said, you guys, please go and follow the different Facebook pages that I also have linked down below. This is also one where I highly recommend you listen to these podcasts and you listen to these interviews. I always link my sources, and I know that I do my best to really express what happens to these victims in my videos, but there are some things that I just can never properly relay, like footage of the areas and interviews with family and things like that. So please go and make sure to listen to the podcast and watch the different coverage on this case, and share as many times as you possibly can. Thank you for taking the time out of your day, as always, to be selfless and listen to the story of two individuals that no longer have a voice to speak for themselves. And thank you for spreading their information and showing support for their families. On that note, I'm going to go ahead and go, you guys. If you haven't already, hit the subscribe button down below to become a part of the Howland fam, so that hopefully we can bring them home together. And I will see you guys in my next video. Bye.